morning sun shines on the gleaming hide of a muscular ranch horse. The aroma of bacon and coffee drifts from the wood cook stove at a cow camp. Silver spurs jingle as the men and women of the West get set for another day in the saddle. From the heart of Canada's finest ranching country, this is the Spirit of the West with rancher and horse trainer Hugh McLennan and his collection of music, poetry, and conversations with the folks who live and work with horses and cattle in the Spirit of the West.
The cowboys of the silver screen were our heroes and gave us countless hours of entertainment. And you know, I still love watching those great old movies and TV shows. And then there are the great athletes that keep us entertained at pro and amateur rodeos all over the West. And there at the festivals and gatherings, there are fine musicians with great voices and poets with spellbinding deliveries to keep the West alive. And behind all of this, the original real deal that it's all based on, saddles up his horse and rides off into the gray dawn. And he doesn't get a lot of attention from folks in the city, and that's fine with him. He's got work to do. Pat Ferguson wrote a fantastic book about growing up on the famous Douglas Lake Ranch, where his dad, Mike Ferguson, was the legendary cow boss.
I says, well, aren't you going to get up? He says, nope. I said, well, why not? He says, I'm waiting for my tobacco pouch to come down. He says, I think I lost it when I was passing the top of that tree up there.
Baxter Black has another colorful episode about a couple of guys trying to help a neighbor.
Meanwhile, Tom had forced Chuck into the pickup bed and instructed him to rope the cow. It took 3 tries with the braided nylon tow rope to catch her.
And that's where the fun really started. And on the Rangeland News, how are things looking with NAFTA?
We feel probably more optimistic in a Mexican agreement sooner than Canada.
I think you'll really enjoy the Cowboy Poetry Spotlight this week.
Old Curly humps up when you cinch him, and when you swing up on his back, he just stands there all spraddled like he's frozen in his track.
On the Urban Saddles and Western Wear horse training file, I saw a rider get off his horse and apply some pretty stern discipline. But in my humble opinion, he did it in a way that the horse will have no idea what he was being punished for. A beautiful classic song of the West and memories of a big outfit from Pat Ferguson after Curly Musgrave gets us going.
The West has really changed. We're running out of range for steers to roam and old cowboys to rope and ride. From Chicago to Seattle, it's hardly fit for cattle. Now the freeways crisscross the Great Divide. The new ranchers into futures, tracking cattle on computers that Grandpa used to tally on the fence. Where's the wranglers and brush poppers? Now they round 'em up in choppers. Seems we're losing all the cowboy represents. Is there a home on the range for the cowboy? Is the antelope still running with the deer? Can a tumbleweed still tumble? Is my prairie home still humble? The springtime in the Rockies bring a tear. Is that cowboy waiting in Red River Valley? Does he miss those bright eyes and sweet smile? Is there home on the range for the cowboy? Let's stay wild in the West for a while. Cowboy life's a disappearing. The new century is nearing. Technology has come to run the show. Why, even Texas Rangers are packing phones and pagers. Lord, just take me back 100 years ago, where there's still home on the range for the cowboy. Is the antelope still running with the deer? Can a tumbleweed still tumble? Is my prairie home still humble? Does springtime in the Rockies bring a tear? Is that cowboy waiting in Red River Valley? Does he miss those bright eyes and sweet smile? Is there home on the range range for the cowboy. Let's stay wild in the West for a while. Is there home on the range for the cowboy? Let's stay wild in the West for a while in the West. Let's stay wild in the West for a while.
Hardly a day goes by that we don't think so fondly of Curly Musgrave, and we lost him, of course, way too soon. Pat Ferguson's blue eyes just light up when he remembers his days on the famous Douglas Lake Ranch, where his dad Mike was the longtime cow boss. And riding for a big outfit is a dream a lot of folks have, but boy, Pat, you sure got to live that dream.
I never really knew as a kid what I was involved in. I just thought that's the way it was. I thought all ranches were, 500,000 acres and 20,000 head of cattle, and I had never really saw a small outfit. It was all big right from the start, and lots of cowboys, and the cowboy crew was, there was over 30 cowboys in that outfit, and probably they were separate from the farm crew. The farm crew was, that's all they did was put up hay and feed cattle, and the cowboys, all they did was ride. And so, cowboys didn't know how to drive a tractor or do anything, couldn't hardly drive a truck even. And it was pretty Western back then.
You put so many of these stories and these memories into your book, and I got a kick out of how it started when, long before you were actually part of the crew, but you were riding your tricycle. Can you just bring back that little episode?
Yeah, well, whenever the cowboys would ride through our place, the main road went right by the house, and cowboys were coming in one day. It was Dave Lindley's crew on there. They were the Jack Pine crew from, they ran the young herd up in the hills, and he was coming through with his cowboys one day, and we had a big hedge around our yard. I couldn't see out onto the road, so I could hear these horses coming down the road, and I just had to go have a look. So,
how old were you about?
I was about maybe about 4 or 5 years old, I guess. And I rode my tricycle straight out onto the road, right into the middle of a bunch of these cowboys, and their horses were pretty bronky, and it didn't take very long. Them horses were sucking back and bucking and rearing and spinning around and trying to get away from this little varmint on the red bicycle, and of course I was a little surprised too. And old Dave Lindley, a big old Indian cowboy, and big man, well respected, and he just seized the moment, boy, and he put the spurs to his horse and goosed him right at me. And here was his horse, nose to nose with me, and blowing snot all over me, and I was terrified. My hair was straight back, and Dave hollers at me in a big booming voice, just like Yosemite Sam. He says, "Say, boy, how'd you like to trade my horse for your bike?" He says. Of course, all the other boys were laughing, and they thought it was a big joke. And they finally backed off. He let his horse back up there, and away they went. They rode down the road, and they were all laughing. And of course, being a little bit terrified at the time, I went in the house and changed my shorts.
Next, it's another story about cowboy underwear and some music that'll take you right up to the high and windy hills when the Spirit of the West continues right after this. Welcome back to the Spirit of the West. Pat Ferguson is riding along this week, the author of 3 best-selling books, and the one I sure love is Cowboys, Good Times, and Wrecks. All about Pat's days growing up on one of the biggest, and now maybe the biggest cattle ranch in North America. And in the book, there's a story about a cowboy who found a pretty unique way to get his long underwear laundered.
Well, that was Bud Watkins, and he was riding for Colchana Cattle Company at the time for Guy Rose, and they were turning out just after Brandon time, and they were moving a bunch of cattle up Colchana Creek toward Courtney Lake there, and by God, it started warming up, and so. Old Bud figured, it's suddenly summertime, so he bailed off his horse in front of God and all them cows and started getting naked, and he threw his long handles out on a wild rose bush there, and got back into his rigging there and jumped on his horse and carried on with the herd, and so that fall he's coming down out of the mountains, and God, it's getting cold, and wind's blowing, and dirty raw wind blowing, and he's thinking, dang, I had a pair of long johns somewhere around this country. And as the herd comes by, he said, oh, there they are right there. And he bailed off his horse, and there he was getting naked in front of all them cows again. And he peeled his long handles off the rose bush there. And the way I wrote it in the book, they'd spend a whole summer amongst all those rose blossoms there. And they smelled almost purty, and the skid mark was almost gone. But I wrote in there how he crowded in amongst all the spiders and ticks there and got his rigging back on and mounted up, and he rode away with a big grin on his face. He's finally warm.
Grandpa used to tell me tales of the times when he was young, while riding across his daddy's ranch from dawn to setting sun. He could ride for miles and miles, no fences blocking the way. He said, you should have been here, son, back in the good old days. You should have been here back in the good old days. The summer winds would blow our cares away. Free and easy most all the time, that's what he would say. You know it don't seem so long ago, back in the good old days. While driving down this asphalt road, a thought keeps crossing my mind. I wonder how this valley used to look back in Grandpa's time. The 6-lane highway was just a trail, no road signs leading the way. I wished I could have been here then, back in the good old days. You should have been here back in the good old days. The summer winds would blow our cares away. Free and easy most all the time, that's what he would say. You know it don't seem so long ago, back in the good old days. Summer winds would blow our cares away. Free and easy most all the time, that's what he would say. You know it don't seem so long ago, back in the good old days. You know it don't seem so long ago, back in the good old days.
The summer wind would blow our cares away. Back in the good old days, that's Justin and the Montanas. And those days are just like we're talking about today. And Pat, I'd like you to go back now to your book and the story about that big wagon wreck.
Well, it was quite a deal. I got to ride with some of the old-timers like old Slim Campbell. Slim was a character. That's where I learned to cuss real good. From Slim. Yeah, he could cuss in all kinds of different volumes and colors, and I tell you, he could cuss in Technicolor, and I learned quite a bit from Slim. But you could tell when Slim was around, because you could hear him bellering a half a mile away if he was down there brush popping cattle out of a canyon someplace. And it didn't take long for him to get cattle moving. He was a character, old Slim, a real character. And he's the one I wrote about where who was it? Hank Lowen had the wagon wreck coming down out of Wilson Springs cow camp, and the wagon fell apart, and the arse fell out of her pretty bad there.
That's where this gal was going to ride in the wagon, but she decided she'd rather ride a horse.
Yeah, well, she was the cook, and he was all excited because he figured the cook was going to ride beside him on the wagon all the way back to Dry Farm cow camp, and that would have been about a 8-hour ride across that big valley and up the other side, and he thought he was going to cozy up to the cook on the way over there. Well, she didn't want to ride in that wagon, and so the old man says, well, you take that old mare there, and that was old Shenanigan, my old mare that I started cowboying on. And so he gave her that mare, so she's riding along there, and spurs are jingling, and he's driving the wagon, showing her what a beautiful ride she was missing, and the tug chains are jingling away there. And, well, of course, he got down near the bottom of the hill, and they come around that last corner a little hot there, and something came unglued on the front of that wagon, and he caught a rock and flipped the whole outfit off into the Saskatoon bushes and down over the bank, and then the team took off and busted loose, and they got all tangled up across the creek. And of course, Slim Campbell, he'd rode ahead to open the gates, and he could hear all this roaring and crashing and smashing, and then here comes the team, minus the wagon and minus the whole outfit. And so he tied the horses up, got them untangled, and tied them to a fence, and rode back across. And here's old Hank Lowen down in the bushes there, bleeding real bad, and he was leaking pretty good. And Slim just didn't show him a whole lot of pity. He just looked down at him off his horse, and he says, by golly, Hank, you don't look like you're going to make it. Oh, Hank, so, yeah, he says, he gave him a lot of encouragement. He says, well, no, God, he says, don't say that. He says, I'm hurting real bad. So, but anyways, they went and they got somebody with a truck way down the valley there, a 4-wheel drive, and they loaded old Hank up and hauled him off to town, and the doctor shoved his brains back in and sewed him up, and they got him all fixed up, and he survived.
I like the way you put that. I had to read that to Billy again last night. The doctor shoved his brains back in and got all his parts pointed the right way. Now, would he have been Don Lowen's?
Donnie, that would have been Donnie's uncle.
Okay, well, there's another pretty good wreck coming up, and it'll be described vividly by Baxter Black, and a song about cowboy life and cowboy love from a Canadian writer, and then the Rangeland News when the Spirit of the West continues right after this.
Howdy, friends. This is Baxter Black on Spirit of the West with Hugh McLennan, with a little peek at Tom and Chuck's Big Adventure. Ladies and gentlemen and followers of cowboy humor, I have carved another book from my funny bone, guaranteed to tickle your humorous. Sorry. The title is Scrambled Wisdom. Almost isn't is it? Which almost makes sense. Regardless, it's almost $20, only $19.95 plus shipping. Call 800-654-2550 or online at baxterblack.com. Here's a joke. What did he get on his IQ test? Drool. There she goes, pointed Chuck. Who? Asked Tom, having just walked around the vet clinic after unloading a cancer eye cow. Old 341, our cow. There she goes, right down Highway 51, said Chuck. Turns out, after Tom unloaded her, she had slid out an open hole in the alley, once inside the large animal exam room. From there, she had made her way into the pharmacy, flattening a 3-hinge metal door, into the small animal surgery, scattering tables, tools, and trays, through the receptionist's corner and waiting room, leaving a trail of high-priced dog food, overpriced pills, and underpaid receptionists in her wake. A green wake, I might add, on the walls, tail high. Mrs. Oman threw her kitty 6 feet in the air, and Mr. Bennett squeezed an air bubble out of his Pomeranian. The cow cleared the leash and tag display, crashed through the plate glass window, saluted Chuck in the parking lot, and headed home. Tom and Chuck jumped in the pickup and trailer, just as a couple local top hands pulled up, trailer and horses in tow. "You need help?" asked Batman and Robin. "You bet. Follow us," yelled Tom as he swung out onto the road. In less than a mile, Tom and Chuck were hazing the cow down the shoulder of the highway between Mountain Home and Bruno. Batman and Robin raced within 10 yards of the cow, pulled off the road, got out, unloaded their horses, brushed them down, bridled up, tightened their cinches, and mounted, and by then they were a mile behind again. They reloaded their horses, jumped in the truck, but it wouldn't start. Meanwhile, Tom had forced Chuck into the pickup bed and instructed him to rope the cow. It took 3 tries with the braided nylon tow rope to catch her. She was tiring and had slowed considerably. Chuck dallied on a short chunk of 2x2, jammed in the middle hole, and slipping the dally, they managed to slow her to a stop. Just as Tom and Chuck finished loading old 341 in the trailer, the dynamic duo came riding up. "Sure appreciate your help," said Tom. "Anytime we can return the favor, just holler." "Well," said Batman, "maybe you could jump our battery on your way back to the vet's." "Ah, you bet," said Tom. "That's what friends are for." This is Baxter Black on Spirit of the West with Hugh McLennan. Thanks for listening.
Just ahead of the rangeland news, here's a guy who did some cowboying on the eastern slopes, and for a lot of years he played on Ian Tyson's recordings and live shows. And by the way, he'll be at the Salmon Arm Roots and Blues Festival August 16th to the 19th with Cindy Church. This is Nathan Tinkham.
Well, Allison lives by the Big Bend, far from the ocean she knows. She'll spend all day just fighting the heat, then the next morning it snows. She left her home on the west coast to follow a cowboy out there. 20 years later she's living alone with no one to watch or to care. The lines on her face have grown deeper, her fingers all blunted from toil. Such is the ravage that comes from living close to the dry desert soil. Just as the morning is stealing, in her hat and her old working clothes, she rides out to cattle, living this life that she chose. Where horses run wild and cattle wear horns, and everything else is covered with thorns. Back when the cholla was blooming, I stopped in just to see how my old friend was doing, what made her so different from me.
Where horses run wild, cattle wear horns, and everything else is covered with thorns.
Ghosts of bandits and rangers ride through the hills all around. The sun and the wind and the years still haven't covered the blood on the ground. Well, this ain't no place for a woman. The country's too hard, so they say. But Allison never would listen to that kind of talk anyway. Where horses run wild and cattle wear horns, and everything else is covered with thorns. I thought of the last time I saw her, sitting so quiet and near. She closed her eyes as she listened for something that I couldn't hear.
the news of the rangeland, a roundup of news and coming events from around the West.
At the top of page 1, it says U.S. Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue sat down with Canada's Minister of Agriculture, Lawrence MacAulay, at the Canadians' farm. And did that lead to anything positive with the ongoing NAFTA negotiations? Well, let's find out from Gary Crawford.
Intractable. That's how Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue described some of the issues keeping the U.S. and Canada from a NAFTA agreement. This after a day in Canada visiting with Canada's Ag Minister Lawrence MacAulay. In a phone hookup after the meetings, Perdue said he was still hoping for a new and improved NAFTA with Canada and Mexico.
We will continue to discuss NAFTA on into the summer and hopefully have some resolution there. We feel probably more optimistic in a Mexican agreement sooner than Canada. We still have some intractable issues with Canada that we are working through, but hopefully we can get an agreement with Mexico and then with Canada very soon this summer. We know that we're up against the Mexican elections here at the beginning of next month.
And U.S. midterm elections in November. However, Perdue said the U.S. elections really are not playing a part in trying to speed up the NAFTA negotiating process. Gary Crawford for the U.S. Department of Agriculture, Washington.
The National Cattlemen's Beef Association in the U.S. publicly supports NAFTA, but two other cattle groups, which are somewhat smaller than the NCBA, are vehemently opposed to the deal. RCAF USA and the U.S. Cattlemen's Association that claim that NAFTA is detrimental for American ranchers because the U.S. has a trade deficit in beef and cattle with Canada and Mexico. In May, in a news release, the U.S. Cattlemen's Association said America imported $2.25 billion more in beef and cattle than it exported among NAFTA countries in 2016. And that's compared to a surplus in beef trade of $226.7 million in 1994 when NAFTA was implemented. By 2016, the surplus in beef has become a deficit of $710.4 million. And the combined deficit in cattle had grown to $1.55 billion, according to the U.S. Cattlemen's Association. But, you know, these USCA numbers are a little bit misleading because data from its own news release shows that America had a trade surplus in beef with Canada and Mexico from 2006 to 2014. And in certain years during that period, that surplus topped $1 billion. And secondly, they omit the fact that U.S. beef exports are booming. Total beef exports to all nations grew from $33.6 billion in 2008 to $7.2 billion in 2017. And as well, they don't mention that cattle imports create jobs in American feedlots and meat packing plants. And RCAF, which has more members than the U.S. Cattlemen's Association, shares similar information on beef trade and NAFTA, particularly the idea that trade deficits harm farmers in the U.S. The United States Senate Appropriations Committee passed the FY19 Agriculture Appropriations Bill on June 18th with a provision to maintain the ban on the slaughter of horses and burros for human consumption on U.S. soil. The provision bars spending by the U.S. Department of Agriculture to inspect horse packing plants and effectively continues the banning of horse slaughter in the U.S. All of Calgary's co-op food stores will be exclusively stocking and selling fresh Alberta beef. The only Alberta beef commitment marks the first time a major grocery retailer in the Calgary region is promising only locally produced fresh beef to its members. The co-op is partnering with JBS Canada in Brooks to ensure all of its fresh beef is locally sourced for its 24 stores in Calgary and the surrounding area. Well, our amazing Western Spirit Band is on the road again. We just completed a couple of great concerts out in the BC interior here with some wonderful people. And we will be at the 42nd Annual Ivan Danes Country Music Picnic in August. This great event, 42 years Ivan's been putting this on. It goes August 9th to the 12th at the Danes Rodeo Ranch at Innisfail. And Jim and Mike and I look forward to seeing you there. We'll be on stage on Friday night. And then we'll be at the Old McDonald's Music Festival. It happens on September the 7th and 8th at Old McDonald's Farm near Erskine, Alberta, close to Buffalo Lake. And that's the place where my wife Billy learned how to water ski. And it would have been so much easier. They would have had a boat to pull her. Anyway, you can only get tickets for the Old McDonald's Farm Festival by calling this number, 403-742-6786. 6603. And, you know, it's so important to support events like this one and the up-and-coming Stony Plain Cowboy Gathering. We want to keep our way of life alive, our traditions and our values and our culture, and spread Western music and the values of the West with the rest of the world. And events like this are one way to do it. So I hope you can support them both. All of them, in fact. Next regular cattle sale at the BC Livestock Co-op Yards in Kamloops will be July the 10th. Next one in Williams Lake, July the 19th, and in Vanderhoof on July the 20th. All the information at bclivestock.bc.ca. Meanwhile, over at the Innisfail Auction Market, regular cattle sales every Wednesday with butcher cows and bulls starting at 9 a.m., calves, yearlings, and bred cows to follow. You can get all the information there at InnisfailAuctionMarket.com. And that takes us down to the final item. I've been kind of on a bit of a soapbox today for some reason, but, you know, it seems to me we see a lot of ego in today's media superstars and politicians. And sometimes I like to think back on the values of some of my heroes, both longtime working cowboys, horsemen, and the singing and movie cowboys. And the late Rex Allen, in fact, Rex Allen Sr., he was all three. And behind the chutes at a big indoor rodeo where Rex and Coco were the contract act, somebody saw Rex working hard, shining up his beautiful custom-made boots. And they walked up and said, "Why, Mr. Allen, why are you polishing your own boots?" And Rex just looked up and grinned and said, "Well, whose boots should I be polishing?" Just like he was. And that's the Rangeland News. Coming up on Urban Saddles and Western Wear Horse Training File, I'll look at ways to deal with a horse's unwanted behavior in a way the horse will understand. And there's more from Pat Ferguson when the Spirit of the West continues right after this. Welcome back to the Spirit of the West. Wow, our 17th annual Spirit of the West cruise will be sailing in just over a couple of months. And it's going to be something that most of us have always wanted to do. First night in the beautiful Chateau Frontenac Hotel in Quebec City, and then on down the St. Lawrence and the Atlantic seaboard and a lot of beautiful historic maritime ports, and on down through New England, winding up with a 3-day stay in New York City. And this one, I think, is just about filled up. You could probably check and see, but I think we're about full. But stay tuned. We are working up another great one for 2019. Another one I'm sure a lot of you have had on your bucket list for a long time. And for information on our cruises, you can just call the toll-free number 1-800-530-0131. And now, Stanley, my little horse, ask Jeff what time it is.
Now it's time for the Horse Training File, brought to you by Irvine Tack and Western Wear, Canada's largest Western store.
Springtime, it's a wonderful time. It's all about bumblebees, butterflies, and bulls. So suit up for rodeo season with Urban Tack and Western Wear. Boots and belts, jeans and shirts, hats and accessories. All the top names too. Priced right so you can celebrate the season with a whole new wardrobe. My friends at Irvin's will take good care of you. So stop by Canada's largest Western store today. Exit 305 off Highway 2 by Crossfield.
Don't just wear it, live it. Irvin Tack and Western Wear.
I saw a couple of examples a while back of a rider trying to discipline his horse for behavior he didn't like, and it seemed to me his approach was not the best way to go about it. In the first instance, it was a breezy day, and they'd been riding for a couple of hours when the wind blew the guy's hat off. He got off, retrieved his hat, and when he put his foot in the stirrup to get back on, his horse just moved forward and swung his hips away. Now, this happened a couple of times, and the guy got frustrated, yanked on the bridle reins a couple of times, and then smacked the horse on the butt. And this just made the situation worse. And I think, if he'd slowed down a little bit, looked at where the horse's mind was when he tried to get on, it might have been better. If he could have made sure the horse was balanced and ready for the guy to step up smoothly, checking any forward motion with the reins and then easing into the saddle, it should have worked. If not, instead of yanking on the reins and smacking him on the butt, I think just untracking the horse's hind legs and having them cross over in both directions a couple of times and then settle him down is all he needed to do. Now, in another situation, the riders were all resting their horses when one of the ponies laid his ears back, switched his tail, and then humped up and backed up about 10 steps and aimed a kick at another horse. Now, the rider on that horse took a few minutes to gain his balance, and then he rode the horse away from the group, and then he got off and he yanked the horse around viciously and worked him over a little bit. And I think that unwanted behavior when I'm on my horse should be corrected, if at all possible, while I am still in the saddle. And that correction is not to smack him or beat on him, but simply to move his feet, disengage his hind quarters, and move him around his front quarters fairly quickly, first one way and then the other, and read him carefully. And if you see an attitude of submission develop, then at that point release the pressure and consider the episode over. And as for the guy that rode away from the group and got off and tried to discipline his horse from the ground a few minutes after the behavior happened, that horse will have no idea why he's being punished. And for Irvin Saddles and Western Wear, that's the Horse Training File. Something that our horses really do well on is that daily feeding of Hoffman's Horse Ration. And you can find out more at hoffmanshorseration.com. Now, just before I get back to Pat Ferguson, here's Billy Chernoff.
A player, piano, and a gut string guitar. An empty round table across from the bar, and next to the window a smoking cigar. An old man is waiting for the music to start. Won't you play me that song about riding the range, where the deer and the antelope play? How back in the old days we lived all those songs we sang, my compadres and me. My old compadres and me. It was southern Alberta in them Porcupine Hills where I first buckarooed. I remember it still. It was Coleman and Blairmore and the old town of Frank. When the wind blew in Pincher, Lord, it sure made you think. Won't you play me that song about riding the range, where the deer and the antelope play? How back in the old days we lived all those songs we sang, my compadres and me. My old compadres and me. Last summer when we all rode on down, the boys needing gear and a night on the town, a dance with a lady and a cool glass of beer. It was 1907, but it seemed like last year. With all the old memories spinning round in his head, he turned to the waitress and said, as soon as they get here, draw three. With an echo in his voice, his face finds the light. His friends finally get there, the place comes alive. He lets out a laugh and breathes a big sigh. That barmaid is grinning when he catches her eye. Won't you play me that song about riding the range, where the deer and the antelope play? How back in the old days we lived all those songs we sang, my compadres and me. My old compadres and me.
Pat Ferguson's dad, Mike, was the longtime cow boss of the Douglas Lake Ranch, and Pat has put a lot of wonderful memories into his book, Cowboys, Good Times, and Wrecks. And at the end of the book, you explain in a very poignant way why you decided to leave cowboy life, and I strongly suggest that folks, you buy the book and find out how that went. But, yeah, Pat, you did kind of pull the pin.
You know, when I left the ranch, I got tired of living in poverty, so I went to work. I thought I'll try something else. I went underground mining. You imagine that, getting off a horse and going underground.
A great big open sky.
Yeah, well, it was tough, but I wanted to raise a family. But I was living in town there in an apartment there with my wife, and the old man stopped by one morning, come in from the ranch, and boy, I got the coffee going and everything, and I looked out the window. There's an old cowboy sitting out in the truck. I says, well, who's out in the truck there? Oh, that's one of my boys there. I says, well, bring him in for a coffee. He says, oh, he can't come in. I said, how come? He said, well, he's got a broken hind leg. I said, well, what do you mean he's got a broken hind leg? Well, yeah, his horse bucked him off and ran the full length of him, stomped all over him, broke his leg. So I says, well, why isn't he in the hospital? He says, well, his appointment's not till 11 o'clock. I says, that's not how you do it. I said, you take him to emergency. So I grabbed the coffee, and I went out to the guy, and I give him a coffee, and I says, how you feeling? Oh, good, he says. I says, you hurting? Oh, little, he says. I said, well, you're not looking too good. And he says, oh, yeah, it don't matter. He was just happy to be in town. He didn't care.
Pat, there's another story about your dad, Mike, and a bronc ride you saw him make, and I guess the way you tell it in the book, you were about 11 years old already, but you were out with the cowboy crew since about 4 in the morning that time of year, and one day when you got back in the early afternoon, your little buddy, George Saddleman, was ready to play.
And here, I'd get home, and the cook's son there, George Saddleman, he was my little buddy. Well, George, he's just getting out of bed, and he's ready to play, and I'd been in the saddle all day long already, been in the saddle for 12 hours already, so I get in and have a bite to eat, and I want to go and lay down and have a siesta, but no, George wanted to play, so we had a little rodeo grounds we built out of baler twine up in the poplar trees there. And we just wound this baler twine around the trees, and we had bucking chutes and everything. Well, we were the broncs, and we had little forked sticks that we put over the back of our neck there. They were like upside down slingshots, and we were the horses. So I was bucking that day. So he opened the chute, and I come flying out of the chute trying to buck their stick off. And of course, he was a rodeo. He's a rodeo announcer. He's Bud Stewart. And then we come flying out of the chute, and all of a sudden now he's a pickup man. He's Percy Manny Barriott. And of course the bronc rider was Ted Varro.
Ted the Stick.
Yeah, so we had quite a few, we had quite an imagination as kids. But anyways, while we're having our rodeo, we just finished our rodeo, and I was over there packing some water for George's mom. She was our cook. We were packing some water from the well, and the old man was riding that big colt around out there, and some of the other boys were riding their colts around too. They were just riding around nice and easy outside the corral. Well, that hobble broke between the front cinch and the hind cinch, and the wreck was on. That big gelding was flanked up right now, and he just flew apart. And he was really bucking good too. And the old man was putting on quite a ride there. But he finally come unglued there, and down he came, and he's laying in the middle of the road over there. And that horse bucked right up through the middle of our rodeo grounds and tore our rodeo grounds all to pieces, and then took off. And we caught up to him about 4 hours later, but the old man laid there on the road. He broke his back, and he's laying there under the tree, and I ran over there. I says, boy, Dad, you sure joined the club. And he says, yep. I says, well, aren't you going to get up? He says, nope. I said, well, why not? He says, I'm waiting for my tobacco pouch to come down. He says, I think I lost it when I was passing the top of that tree up there. But he did. He broke one vertebrae in his back there, so he was laid up for a while. But yeah, he said he never felt so much power in his life. Yeah, you know, that old horse ended up being part of my string a few years later.
Wow. Wow, and sadly, you mentioned Ted Varro there, and we lost him not that long ago either. Great cowboy and a great guy. Anyway, if you haven't read the book, you'll love it. It's widely available at Chapters and Amazon and Indigo and Google Books, or you can call Pat at 250-674-3348. And coming up, one of the great classic songs of the West and a piece of cowboy poetry I'm pretty sure you're going to really enjoy when the Spirit of the West continues right after this. Welcome back to the Spirit of the West. The song I dug up for our classic song segment was a pretty big hit, even on the pop charts in 1945. The Western Writers of America included it in their list of the 100 best Western songs of all time. It was written by Dick Charles, and that's, he was better known maybe as Richard Charles Krieg, Larry Marks, and Eddie DeLange. And it was written for the movie with the same name as the song. And the movie starred Roy Rogers, and the song was also used in another Roy Rogers movie that same year. That one was Don't Fence Me In, where the song we're looking at was sung with Roy backed up by the Sons of the Pioneers. The unique melody that carries the essence of an easy rockin' hoofbeat rhythm captured the imagination of dozens of singers like Bing Crosby, Frank Sinatra, the Andrews Sisters, Frankie Lane, Fats Domino, and so many others who all had a shot at recording it. So here's Red Steagle with this week's classic Western song, Along the Navajo Trail.
Every day along about evening, and the sunlight beginning to fade, I ride through the slumbering shadows along the Navajo Trail. Every night when the crickets are calling, coyotes are making a way, I dream by smoldering fire along the Navajo Trail. I love to lie and listen to the music of the wind strumming a sagebrush guitar, while over yonder hill the moon is climbing. It always finds me wishing on a star. Well, what do you know? It's morning already. There's a dawning so silver and pale, and it's time to climb into my saddle and ride the Navajo Trail. I love to lie and listen to the music of the wind strumming a sagebrush guitar, while over yonder hill the moon is climbing. It always finds me wishing on a star. Well, what do you know? It's morning already. There's a dawning so silver and pale, and it's time to climb into my saddle and ride the Navajo Trail, and ride the Navajo Trail.
Now that's a true Western classic. Les Buffum is in the Cowboy Poetry Spotlight today, and this one takes you right through a cowboy's day and what life out with a wagon is really like.
Have you ever been away out yonder and laid out underneath the stars and gazed at them in wonder as the twilight came in bars, while a coyote staged its chorus from atop some lonely hill, and you snugged down in your blankets to escape the morning chill? Till that old cook starts to stern, and then 'fore long comes his shout, "You punchers come and get it, or I'm gonna throw it out." Well, you get dressed in a hurry and you roll your bed up tight, drag it with you to the wagon by the flickering firelight. There you snortin' to the washpan that jars you wide awake, 'cause there's ice around its edges and it sure is hard to take. Then you fill your cup and plate up underneath old Cookie's stare. He's waiting for you to complain, but you know that you don't dare. Even if the bread is burnt and soggy and the beans come in a chunk, you sure can't beat the coffee of that old ornery skunk. Well, you drop your plate into the wash tub and go looking for the boss, who when he sees you knows you're ready for him to rope you out a hoss. You call out for old Curly, knowing there'll be a fight, and he'll probably work them kinks out that you gathered through the night. Old Curly humps up when you cinch him, and when you swing up on his back, he just stands there all spraddled like he's frozen in his track. But you are a woolly puncher, now you know that's true for sure, so you rear back and poke him in the belly with your spur. He lets out a mighty beller and his head does disappear, till you're wondering if you saddled him facing toward the rear. Well, he sure tears up the sagebrush, and then he finally starts to slow, and you start your day a knowing that you put on quite a show. The boss gives you an outside circle, and you head out at a trot, mighty glad for Cookie's bread and beans, 'cause you know till dark they're all you've got. You make your circle and you gather and you push 'em all on in. Sun's a-setting over yonder when you finally see the fire again. Then it's more of Cookie's bread and beans, and you crawl into your sack, where you lay a while a-thinking about your sweetheart that's waiting for your coming back. Ain't long until you're snoring, and then once again you are awake and looking for your night horse tied out on a stake. 2 hours riding night herd, the cattle are all bedded down, and you're singing to 'em gentle as you circle all around. Then you crawl back into your blankets and you gaze up at the sky, at those blazing stars a-shining, and you have to wonder why you ever chose to be a cowboy. Then the answer floats in on the wind. There's that old coyote calling from some lonely hill again.
Well, thank you so much for riding along today, and I sure hope you can join us right here next week at the same time. Now, if you're looking for parts to keep that old tractor going, try Mark McMillan's page, bctractorparts.com. And be sure to look for the latest issue of Canadian Cowboy Country Magazine at your favorite newsstand, or you can subscribe at cowboycountrymagazine.com. Till next week, I'm Hugh McLennan. Hope to see you down the trail somewhere real soon.